The black Mercedes 320 Cabriolet be slowed to a crawl on the sharp, descending hairpin curve. It was a warm spring morning, 27 May 1942. The car's open top gleamed under the sun. A man in a raincoat stepped off the curb into the empty road. He drew a Sten submachine gun from under his coat, aimed directly at the passenger seat, and pulled the trigger. The firing pin clicked uselessly against a jammed bolt. Nothing happened. In that one frozen heartbeat, the hunt for the most feared man in Nazi Germany, Reinhard Heydrich, the Prague Butcher, erupted from a silent ambush into screaming, desperate chaos. The man inside the car was the architect of the final solution, the cold, calculating brain who had chaired the Wannsee Conference just 4 months earlier. His very presence in Prague was a death sentence for tens of thousands. But on this morning, 2 exiled soldiers, ordinary young men who had been living in a British commando camp, had parachuted back into their occupied homeland with a single, suicidal mission: kill him. This is not just the story of the most audacious assassination of World War II. It is the story of the terrifying, bullet-torn last stand that followed inside a cathedral crypt, where 7 men chose how they would be remembered. London, late 1941. Behind the blackout curtains of the Special Operations Executive, a plan of breathtaking risk was taking shape. Codenamed Operation Anthropoid, its orders were brutally simple: drop 2 Czechoslovak soldiers into the heart of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia to assassinate the man even Adolf Hitler called the man with the iron heart. Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš were not professional killers. Gabčík was a Slovak locksmith's son, quiet and steady. Kubiš was a Czech farm boy, fiercely determined. Both had fled their homeland after the Nazi dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, made their way through occupied Europe, and volunteered for the impossible. At a series of secluded training camps in Scotland and Cheshire, they were drilled relentlessly in close-quarters combat, demolitions, and silent killing. They practiced with the notoriously unreliable Sten gun, learning its quirks. They were told the truth. Their chances of escape after the attack were virtually zero. No one expected them to survive. On the bitter cold night of 28 December 1941, a Handley Page Halifax bomber clawed its way through thick winter cloud over the Protectorate. The cargo door opened onto a freezing void. Gabčík and Kubiš, loaded with forged papers, a slim radio transmitter, and 2 modified British No. 73 anti-tank grenades, jumped into the blackness. A severe navigation error scattered the drop. Instead of landing near Pilsen, they came down far off target in the snow-covered fields near Návězdí, outside Prague. They buried their parachutes in the frozen ground and vanished. They were utterly alone, deep behind enemy lines, with the Gestapo already hunting for rumors of parachutists. Reinhard Heydrich, meanwhile, was at the apex of his monstrous power. As Deputy Reich Protector, he had transformed Prague into a factory of fear, drowning the Czech resistance in a wave of mass arrests, public executions, and ruthless intelligence sweeps. He was the head of the Reich Main Security Office, the organizer of the Einsatzgruppen death squads, and the presiding evil genius of the Wannsee Conference. Yet in a staggering display of arrogance, he drove daily from his country estate in Paninské Brežiny to Prague Castle in an unescorted open-top Mercedes, his SS rank pennant fluttering on the fender. He believed the Czechs were a beaten people, too broken to strike back. That fatal miscalculation became his doom. For 5 long months, Gabčík and Kubiš moved like ghosts through the city, hidden by a network of brave families, including the Moravec household who risked everything. They gathered minute-by-minute intelligence on Heydrich's commute. They ruled out ambushing him at the castle or his estate. The perfect choke point was a tight, right-hand hairpin bend on V. Holshevich Street in the industrial Liban district, where the Mercedes had to brake sharply to navigate the turn, dropping its speed to walking pace. The date was locked, the morning of 27 May 1942. The 2 men slept little that night, checking their weapons one last time. Just after 10 a.m., Gabčík and Kubiš cycled into position. A third parachutist, Josef Valchik, took up a lookout post 100 meters up Kirchmere Avenue, a small signal mirror concealed in his palm. Gabčík's sten was folded beneath a trench coat slung over his arm. The bolt was cocked back, a round chambered. Kubiš carried a weathered leather briefcase, inside which rested the heavy anti-tank grenade, modified with a shortened fuse to detonate instantly on impact. The minutes stretched into an agonizing silence. Then Valchik's mirror flashed. The low, powerful growl of a straight-eight engine echoed off the buildings. Heydrich's Mercedes, with the butcher himself sitting in the front passenger seat and his chauffeur, Oberscharfu Klein at the wheel, rounded the tram stop. Gabčík threw the coat aside, stepped directly into the car's path and pulled the trigger. The sten's bolt jammed forward, frozen. Later investigations would confirm a sliver of fabric or a bent spring had locked the mechanism. Heydrich, instead of ordering Klein to accelerate, made a catastrophic error. He stood up in the slowing car, drew his own Luger pistol, and screamed at the driver to halt. That single act of arrogant rage gave the assassins one last heartbeat. In that frozen second, Kubiš reached back and hurled the briefcase grenade. It arced through the sunlit air, missed the open cabin, and slammed against the Mercedes' right rear wheel arch. The explosion ripped the car's bodywork apart, shearing off the door and blasting a lethal storm of horsehair seat stuffing, wire, glass, and jagged metal fragments deep into Heydrich's diaphragm and spleen. Thick black smoke and panicked screams choked the intersection. Both attackers scattered in opposite directions, firing pistols over their shoulders at the wounded pursuing Klein. Gabčík disappeared into a butcher's shop on the corner, briefly taking refuge before melting away through back gardens. Kubiš, bleeding from his own face cut by shrapnel, mounted a stolen bicycle and pedaled furiously into the side streets. Heydrich, incredibly, was still on his feet, propped against the shattered wreckage of his own vanity, his uniform soaked with blood. He was rushed to the nearby Bulovka hospital on the back of a commandeered van. What followed was a week of medical agony watched by the entire world. Heinrich Himmler personally dispatched his top SS surgeons to Prague. The patient initially rallied, but a deep infection took hold in his abdominal cavity. Septicemia, fueled by the horsehair and road debris blasted into his body, ravaged his organs. On the morning of 4 June 1942, Reinhard Heydrich, the hangman of Europe, died in excruciating pain. Hitler's rage was apocalyptic and instantaneous. He ordered a tidal wave of terror, demanding the lives of 10,000 Czechs in retribution, and dispatched Karl Hermann Frank to carry out the bloodbath. The storm broke immediately. Acting on false intelligence that linked the paratroopers to a small village, German police and SD units surrounded Lidis on the night of 9 June. Every male over the age of 15, 173 men, was lined up against a wall and shot in groups of 10, from morning until late afternoon. The women were deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. The children were ripped from their mothers and gassed in trucks at Chelmno. The village was physically erased, its houses bulldozed and the ground plowed with salt. A few weeks later, the hamlet of Ležáky suffered the same fate. SS death squads swept through Prague, executing more than 1,300 people in the summer of 1942. Red posters offering 1 million Reichsmarks for information were plastered across every wall, and in the shadows, 7 exhausted paratroopers held their breath. Gabčík, Kubiš, and 5 other agents, Adolf Opelka, Josef Valchik, Joseph Bublik, Jaroslav Svark, and Jan Hruby, had been moved by the underground resistance to a final, secret refuge. They were hidden by the brave Orthodox clergy of the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius on Reslava Street. They did not hide in the nave. They lived in the cold, damp crypt carved deep beneath the floor, accessed by a single heavy stone slab and a narrow ladder. For 3 agonizing weeks, they existed in total darkness, fed bread and watery soup by the priest's wife, their eyes adjusting to the tomb-like silence. They knew the Gestapo was closing in. The betrayal came wearing a familiar face. Karel Čerda, a fellow paratrooper from a separate drop who had been hiding separately, cracked under the pressure. He walked into Gestapo headquarters at the Peček Palace and poured out every name, every safe house, every contact for the staggering reward. The trap swung shut before dawn on 18 June 1942. Over 700 Waffen-SS and Gestapo troops sealed the church, smashing the heavy wooden doors. The first wave of the assault hit the choir loft, where Opalka, Bublik, and a wounded Kubiš kept watch. For almost 2 hours, the three men poured precise pistol fire down through the wooden balustrade into the soldiers storming the staircase below. Bullets splintered the organ pipes and shredded the heavy oak pews. Kubiš, despite a streaming head wound, reloaded magazine after magazine. The Germans hurled tear gas canisters. The defenders hurled them back. Finally, ammunition exhausted, Opalka and Bublik placed their pistols to their temples and pulled the trigger, falling into the loft. Kubiš, dazed and fatting fast from blood loss, was dragged out unconscious and died from his wounds within minutes. The assault now focused entirely on the crypt. Gabčík, Valchik, Hruby, and Svark crouched behind the ancient stone pillars, their eyes burning with determination. The SS blasted the stone entrance slab open with explosives, but the single-file, narrow staircase became a vertical killing zone. Every soldier who tried to descend was met with a point-blank shot from a pistol. The Germans switched to an insidious, methodical tactic. They brought in high-pressure fire hoses from the street, forced the thin ventilation windows, and began flooding the crypt. Ice-cold water gushed in, rising past the men's knees, then to their waists, then lapping at their chests. The noise of the water mixed with the roar of German submachine guns. Still, the four defenders fired from the rising water. Still, they refused to shout the words of surrender the SS demanded. The gunfire from below cracked and echoed for an impossibly long time. Then the report of weapons slowed. The ammunition finally ran dry. In the final, terrible moments, each man turned his last remaining bullet on himself. Valchik, Hruby, Svark, and Gabčík, the man whose Sten had jammed in the face of Heydrich, chose a free death over a torturer's cell. When the SS finally stormed the flooded chamber, they found only the silence of absolute defiance, the bodies of 4 men who had written their names into the stone itself. The crypt was sealed, and the brave priests, including Bishop Gorezd, were arrested and later executed. But the sacrifice had already transcended the basement walls. The British and French governments, moved by the staggering courage and the brutal reprisals, formally annulled the Munich Agreement that had dismembered Czechoslovakia, guaranteeing the country's post-war restoration. The exiled government was recognized as a full, sovereign ally. The 7 men who died in that stone tomb tore away the myth of Nazi invulnerability, proving that even the Reich's most heavily guarded figurehead was reachable. Today, the bullet-scarred walls of the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius still stand, bearing silent witness. If you place your hand in the dim, cold light of the crypt, you can feel the deep gouges left by grenade shrapnel and the chiseled impacts of SS bullets. A small bronze plaque bears the names of the 7 paratroopers who refused to kneel. 2 ordinary soldiers, a handful of faithful comrades, and a single, impossible act of daring changed the course of the war, not by winning a battle on a field, but by proving beyond any doubt that no evil is beyond the reach of those willing to give absolutely everything. The Black Merceds never reached the castle that bright May morning, and the flame lit in that cathedral basement has never, ever gone out.